Welcome to the Forum, conversations on local policy brought to you by the Center for Local Governance. Today we're talking to Dr. Ben Powell of the Texas Tech Free Market Institute about economic development policies in Texas.
I've done a lot of work on the role that economic freedoms and private property rights play in promoting productive entrepreneurship that brings economic growth to a nation or a state. The general message is that government should not lead economic development. They should instead kind of get out of the way and just provide an environment of secure property rights and economic freedom and let entrepreneurs do the rest. On the international level, the evidence is overwhelming that freer countries have higher standards of living, they grow faster, they do better on almost any margin that we care about, whether it be infant mortality, literacy rates, the standard of living of the poor, the average incomes, all of these things. In fact, a lot of people like to say, oh, well, capitalism, sure, it's good for the rich, but not the poor. It's just not true. When we look around the world, the freer countries and how the poorest 10% of their population live, in the freest countries, they have a per capita income of the poor people of around $11,000. Just drop down to the next 25% of freest countries, and the poor people have an income of about $3,000. Go down to the least free countries, and it's under $1,000. Whether you're rich or poor, you do better in a free environment than a statist environment. If you're familiar with products that came from Japan, two things that probably jump to mind are electronics and cars. But guess what? Government economic development planning almost prevented that. Under METI, that controlled international trade for Japan for a long time, they denied Sony multiple permits to export. It took Sony years to get approved. When they finally did, of course, they brought us the electronics. In fact, I'm looking at a camera right now that says Sony on it. We wouldn't be recording this interview this way if media had their way. Another example is the cars. Of course, you're familiar with Toyota and Nissan and other Japanese cars. What the Government Planning Bureau wanted to do was merge them all into a single firm in the 1960s. The firms resisted, and they became the success they are today. Bumbling bureaucrats do not know how to plan the market. We need to let market forces work. The same lessons we learn from the international level, that more freedom promotes development, are applicable to the state and local level. Government planners, be they the Soviet commissars or your local development agency in your city, do not know how to plan the market better than the competitive process does. What we need to do is provide an environment of freedom for entrepreneurs to bid on scarce resources and use the profit and loss test to see what are and were the best uses of those resources. Government planners that want to give a subsidy to Walmart or to Caterpillar or one other firm to try to locate in their state, in their city, this distorts that competitive process. These things are not free. It implies taking resources away from other firms in order to subsidize their favored firm. But these government planners don't know which firm should be favored until the market process is actually played out. Local government planners, if they can afford to give a subsidy or a tax break to a new company, are necessarily doing that at the expense of resources that they could be giving away to existing businesses as well. Instead, what they should do is lower the burden of government and lower everybody's tax rate, be they a new existing business, a manufacturer, a retailer, any of these things, so that our process can sort out what companies should come in. We shouldn't be favoring some at the expense of others. If you're a city council member and you're encountered with your development officer proposing to give a subsidy to one company, there's two questions you should ask. One, if this subsidy makes sense for this firm, shouldn't we give it to all firms? The answer should be yes. The second question that you should ask then is, if it doesn't make sense for all firms, why are we giving it to this one? And the answer is, you shouldn't. At the local level, what you want to do is strip down the city services as much as possible, privatizing or using volunteers where appropriate, so that your tax rate that you have to charge people is as low as possible. And then make that uniform to everybody and not distortionary by favoring some businesses or industries over others, picking winners if we want this person to move to our community or that. Instead, you should be concerned with the overall environment of having a small burden of government, be it in terms of the taxation you impose or the regulatory barriers that you create, stopping businesses from coming in.